Hello. My segment here is on kind of based on some research that I did on rural schools in Illinois. And we're going to start off with a poll question. Can you recall any homegrown teachers at your school, primary, middle, or high school? And we'll give you a second there to respond. Let's check those responses. Looks like majority here had at least one homegrown teacher, but that was kind of followed by not having any idea where their teachers were from. And chances are, if you grew up in a rural school, that they were not necessarily from the community that you went to school at, according to the research that I did. I asked three primary questions here. What I want to know what factors brought teachers to work into small schools, what kept them there, and what the teachers themselves thought, what strategies they thought would help to increase teacher recruitment and retention. And I surveyed teachers in the 24 smallest public school districts in Illinois. We have 24 districts that are actually under 100 students. And those are the districts I focused on because research shows that the smallest districts have the most trouble with teacher recruitment and retention and typically have between 25 to 50% teacher turnover. I had 210 teachers were asked to participate, and I had about 54%, 113 of them respond. And I actually was replicating a study that Marcia Davis did in Montana, and she's looked at teacher recruitment and retention in Montana in 2002 and used the research of Colin Boylan, who developed a theory of teacher recruitment and retention, which focused on what he called four spheres of influence: classroom, whole school, community, and family personal spheres. So the factors were all related to those. As far as the recruitment factors that were most influential to teachers accepting rural assignments, number one was best or only job offer, enjoying the rural lifestyle, family and or home close by, and small class size. The two of the most influential recruitment factors identified in this study were also among the top four factors in the Davis study: enjoying the rural lifestyle and family or home close by. The least influential to teacher recruitment were school recruitment program, access to recreational activities, opportunity to practice multi-age teaching, and materials and resources available. And all of these were also the least influential recruitment factors in the Davis study. The sphere of influence that was most influential to teacher recruitment was family personal, and this also replicated the findings of the Davis study. And basically, to summarize, I found that teachers are most apt to accept rural assignments if they're at the beginning of their career, and it's because it's their best or only job offer, and because rural lifestyle appeals to them or they have family nearby. For retention factors, I found that teachers' number one thing that kept them in their schools was relationships with their students, followed by safe environment, small class size, and support from the administrator. The sphere of influence that was most influential to them for teacher retention was community and within classroom factors. And this also mirrored the Davis findings. The least influential retention factors were professional development opportunities, spouse-partner employment were the least influential, and these were also mirrored in the Davis study. For what strategies teachers themselves perceived as being most important for teacher recruitment and retention, providing competitive insurance packages, salaries competitive with other states, more flexibility with scheduling, including flexible personal days, and then a state-funded bonus, basically, for teachers working in small rural public schools. The least influential factors that teachers themselves rated as seeing the least influential for teacher recruitment and retention was help with finding housing, grow your own initiatives, stipends for teachers to earn national board certification, and student teacher placement. And this, too, mirrored the Davis study in finding that these were also ranked as being least effective in that study, too. So the spheres that were most influential to teacher recruitment were family, personal, and whole school. So basically, I also looked at whether or not teachers were actually satisfied and happy working in the rural schools, and I found that they answered this question at the same levels as the national average, 67%, and slightly less than the Davis study. And these teachers said that they would choose teaching as a career all over again. So this seemed to indicate that the teachers in the small school districts of Illinois are happy with their profession, and that the high teacher turnover in these districts is not a result of displeasure with the profession. I also looked at some research regarding Grow Your Own initiatives in my study, and I looked at the Heisman study of 2008, which concentrated on rural schools in Florida. And he found and actually concluded that it would be advisable to limit the number of homegrown teachers in a rural district because transplanted teachers, it was perceived that they had more power. Transplanted teachers perceived that the power was placed with homegrown teachers regardless of their educational experience, educational level, or quality of work, and their social affiliations with administrators, teachers, leaders, or community leaders. So there seemed to be some resentment, he found, of the homegrown teachers. But then, obviously, there's other research as well, and the Williams study of 2010 kind of found the opposite. They really suggested that teacher recruitment and retention problems could be improved by homegrown teachers. And, you know, we know that North Carolina, Georgia, and Virginia have all had homegrown programs in place for several decades and have worked with local universities to provide fast-track certification for non-certified employees. And Virginia has even had districts that have given an opportunity to earn college credit to students while they're still in high school for hard-to-teach areas. But basically, like any study, I had some recommendations at the end, and go over those now. For teacher recommendations, I found that the rural schools had very little diversity. That's not really surprising, but I had like 100% Caucasian teachers that responded to my study, and there was also not very much gender diversity. It was overwhelmingly female. So I think gender diversity is something that administrators could at least look to try to achieve. Rural educational leaders also need to look for teachers who have a rural background, since they're most likely to stay in the rural district, and I suggest that they have some interview questions asking teachers where they grew up, because my research seemed to show that it was more important that a teacher grew up in a rural setting than it was that they grew up in that actual rural school district, because the majority, it was something like 70%, lived outside of the districts where they teach. The importance of homegrown teachers and housing programs for rural schools might also be overstated by the rural research. And some considerations for educational leaders. The big finding in my study was that what attracts teachers to teach in a rural school is not necessarily what keeps them there. That they accept rural assignments primarily for that family personal sphere and for the whole school sphere, but they stay in that rural assignment because they fall in love with their community and because they fall in love with their classroom. Also, that teachers indicated that marketing in their rural districts was either non-existent or not very helpful. And one of the things I found was that half of these rural districts that I surveyed did not even have their own websites, which is actually a state requirement in Illinois, but it's not necessarily enforced. And that could even be a starting point, because we know that a lot of young people today are going to look first on the internet, and if they can't even find a website for the district, that might kind of turn them off. And then exit interviews, I think, would be a very good idea for rural administrators to do, and they might actually want to have a third party conduct them so that teachers can answer and not feel any possible reprisals, but to find out why teachers are actually leaving, what their reasons are, since we know that they're actually satisfied with their profession. And then I think the findings are very important for communities because if it's the community that the teachers fall in love with, then and we know that the majority of them don't live in that community, we need to make them feel included. And rural community leaders need to make sure that teachers are invited to the different functions going on in the community, and that when they are, they're seen as people first and teachers second, and are made to feel welcome. So that's basically followed by my references. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Erin Joyce, who's the director of the Ohio Appalachian Collaborative.